Welcome. Welcome to the SHIDE event that we are conducting as Global Call to Action Against Poverty and any of our alliance partners. In the times of public crisis, we have picked up one very key crisis area is the debt crisis killing the SDGs. At this moment, colleagues, let me share with you that we have interpretation available from English to Spanish and English to French and vice versa. Please select your right channel. Down below the screen, you can see a globe on your right. Click there and you select your right channel. So you will get all, you will listen in your own language, English, French, Spanish. Ingo, can you explain this bit in French, Spanish, and all I have written in the chat?
Ok, bienvenue à la traduction. Vous pouvez choisir. Oh, sorry, I had the English interpretation, so I had to. Again, vous pouvez choisir français. En bas, vers le droit, vous trouvez cette option de. Je ne sais pas comment ça s'appelle en français, probablement traduction ou interprétation. Vous pouvez choisir français là-bas. Et oui, et c'est le même pour l'espagnol aussi. So,
Okay.
do we have, the problem is that the interpreters are all in assigned, so they cannot speak. Can anybody say this in Spanish? I don't know, Patricia, maybe
Patricia,
I see
maybe,
you.
yeah.
That would be nice.
Sí, a todos los que están conectados y desean escuchar todo este panel en español, pueden elegir la opción de interpretación en la parte de abajo a la derecha de sus pantallas.
Okay. Thanks, Ingo and Patricia. So, colleagues, the title we're discussing today is Debt Killing the SDGs. As you know, we are already gone past the halfway mark of we're in the 9th year of implementation of SDGs. There are several factors which are hindering implementation of SDGs, and we understand debt is one such key factor. There are several countries in global south who are in the crisis times with either debt trap or in the times of debt crisis. We'll have a list of panelists who are expert in different areas around debt and social protection and SDGs. We'll explain you whether we're actually in a crisis time so far as debt is concerned. Is there a way out if debt is actually impacting the social protection, which is quite important for us post-pandemic period, whether countries in the global south, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, are independent enough to take financial decisions to fund their education, to fund their health, fund for food security, or they are being dictated by international institutions like World Bank, IMF, or for that matter, private lenders. So all these discussions we will hear from our panelists. Let me go through very briefly the program schedule. We'll have discussion on debt situation in the world with focus on Latin American countries. Patricia will do it. How debt affected the social protection in African countries. Jen Anyango will do it. Impact of debt on SDGs in Asia countries. Mai will speak on it. Debt situation in Sri Lanka. We have Armija who will deal with this. Role of global accelerator to fund social protection. Samuel Overa will talk on this. We'll have one more speaker, bridging gap in ODA, Official Development Alliance to finance SDGs in LDCs, least developed countries. Raman Adhikar will speak. Colleagues, let me also take this opportunity to thank our co-organizers. Let me also name them. That in that NGO Federation of Nepal, Asia Dalit Rights Forum, the Inclusivity Project, Pakistan Development Alliance, Wadahan Todo Abhiyan, Noakhali Rural Development Society from Bangladesh, Cooperation Committee of Cambodia, Philippines Rural Reconstruction Movement, Polycom Girls, GCAP Kenya, GCAP Ghana, Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors, LDC Watch, South Asian Alliance for Poverty Eradication. So we have all our alliance partners who are also co-organizing this. I now invite Ingo Rees, the Director of Global Call to Action Against Poverty, to moderate the session. My introduction is I am Pradeep Besak. I am Asia Coordinator of GCAP. I am based in. Thank you. Over to Ingo.
Thank you, Pradeep. Welcome also from the HLPF in New York.
Ingo, 1 minute. This is being
Yeah.
recorded and this is also being live streamed through Facebook, if that's okay with all our colleagues here. Thanks.
Okay, so before starting, I also wanted to say thank you to our interpreters. So we have 5 interpreters today. So we have Juan, we have Farah, we have Benoit, we have Hector, and I'm looking for Safia. So yeah, so thank you very much for doing this today. So I hope it works all well. Also, a very warm welcome to all of you, of course, but also to the speakers. I think we have a very interesting group of speakers from different perspectives, like the nationals' perspectives of 2 countries which are very much affected by the debt crisis, Sri Lanka and Kenya, but also then the regional and global perspectives. So let me start to say, when I heard this sentence first, the debt crisis is killing the SDGs, and I thought immediately that's really true. And the SDGs were already sick before, but somehow the debt crisis is now, yeah, has the potential or quite probably killing the SDGs. So as we are here officially meeting during the high-level political forum on sustainable development, that's of course on the SDGs, but actually, yeah, the crisis is not killing only the SDGs, but it is actually killing people around the world, and that is really the sad part. So it's important to hear and to analyze together. Also to be prepared for coming advocacy, also coming mobilization. As GCAP, we mobilize in September. Yeah, but then there are other mobilizations coming up, like traditionally since a few years, there's the Global Week of Action for Debt Justice, Economic and Climate Justice in October this year, also with a focus on the 80 years anniversary of World Bank and IMF. And then we are discussing plans for mobilization next year. So it's really important to have this analysis here together. So let's start with our first speaker, Patricia Miranda, the Global Advocacy Director of Latindad, which is one of the leading organizations working on the topic of debt, but also on the financial, international financial architecture, and also related topics like climate financing and gender. So Patricia works in different fields from the Latin American perspective, but actually also contributing globally a lot. So I'm very happy that you are here. So as I understand, you will talk about the situation from the Latin American and Caribbean perspective, but also give an overview on the global situation. Yeah, please, up to you, Patricia.
Thanks, Ingo, and glad to be Here in this side event panel, I will share my presentation, which is in English, but I will like to speak in Spanish, taking advantage of the translation.
So let me just then say, if you don't understand Spanish, you need to go into the interpretation and click on the English channel then.
Okay, so would you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes? Yeah.
Okay. Bueno, muchísimas gracias nuevamente. Me gustaría comenzar mostrando estos gráficos para que podamos ver que la deuda pública ha ido creciendo, tiene una tendencia creciente en el tiempo y los países que presentan un mayor crecimiento son precisamente los países en desarrollo y podríamos decir las regiones del sur global como América Latina, África, Asia. Podemos ver en el gráfico de la izquierda, en la línea punteada en amarillo, cuál es el comportamiento del crecimiento de la deuda para países de ingreso bajo y países de ingreso medio. Entonces, la deuda pública está creciendo a una rapidez que es el doble en los países en desarrollo si comparamos al crecimiento de la deuda en los países desarrollados. También me gustaría compartir, como ven en el gráfico de la derecha, la situación de la deuda en América Latina, que ustedes pueden ver un pico el año 2020, que es justa precisamente por la pandemia, donde el endeudamiento fue la principal fuente de financiamiento para nuestros países. Se da una reducción en los años siguientes, pero el año 2023 nuevamente se vuelve a incrementar, entonces acercándose, llegando a estar muy de cerca al mismo nivel que tuvimos durante la pandemia. Y las proyecciones, si no se dan cambios importantes y reformas importantes, las proyecciones muestran que va a seguir siendo una fuente muy importante para América Latina como países de ingreso medio, que además acceden a préstamos caros, préstamos no concesionales. Y es lo que voy a comentar más adelante, y es el alto nivel de deuda que tienen los países del sur. Y esta es una información de nuestros colegas de Jubileo Alemania, de Lasia, que nos muestra que desde el 2010 la deuda externa de los países de ingreso bajo y medio se ha incrementado en más del 80%. Entonces, 130 de 150 países están en una situación que está entre ligeramente crítica a muy crítica. Y por supuesto, ¿cuáles son estas regiones o cuáles son los países que están en una situación crítica o muy crítica? Son países de África subsahariana, América Latina y el Caribe, el sur de Asia y el sureste de Asia y el Pacífico. Y esto se debe también al cambio en el panorama de la deuda, que desde el 2010 principalmente tiene un cambio donde los acreedores privados son el 61% del portafolio de la deuda en nuestros países. ¿Y esto qué significa o qué implica? Implica que el costo de la deuda sea más alto porque los acreedores privados, que es a través de la emisión de bonos o títulos valor desde nuestros países, suelen tener tasas mayores porque está relacionado también con el riesgo que es medido por las agencias de calificación crediticia. Por lo tanto, el acceso a financiamiento para nuestros países es más caro. Para dar algunos ejemplos, las regiones en desarrollo se prestan a tasas de interés que son 2 o 4 veces más altas que las tasas a las que accede Estados Unidos y entre 6 a 12 veces más altas que las tasas de interés a las que accede un país como Alemania, por ejemplo. La mitad de los países en desarrollo están destinando el 6,3% de sus ingresos por exportaciones al pago de la deuda externa. Y si algunos saben, en 1950, cuando se dio una importante condonación de la deuda a Alemania. El límite que se había puesto para este indicador en ese momento era 5%. Si superaba el 5%, entonces Alemania no iba a poder recuperarse. Entonces, para comparar cuál es la situación actual de los países en desarrollo respecto al peso de la deuda. Y este peso de la deuda también es importante evaluarlo desde cuánto de los ingresos de nuestros países son destinados al pago del servicio. Y podemos ver que en el gráfico de la izquierda que el 38%, más del 38% en general de los países en desarrollo de los ingresos de estos países son destinados al pago de la deuda. Y ahí está África liderando con más del 50% de sus ingresos en términos de presupuestos. Y lo mismo en el caso del gasto, ¿no? Casi el 30% del gasto total que tienen nuestros países en sus presupuestos son destinados al pago de la deuda. Y si los comparamos más aún con gastos con inversión social, podemos ver también que el pago del servicio y la deuda, por ejemplo, respecto a los gastos en educación, prácticamente son más del doble. Y lo mismo y más aún, todavía la situación empeora si hablamos de los gastos en inversión en salud. El servicio y la deuda en nuestros países prácticamente llega a ser 4 veces más en cuanto a si comparamos el pago de la deuda con la inversión en salud. También es importante mencionar que hay impactos sociales, ¿no? Toda esta situación de la deuda y todos estos indicadores y cifras se traducen en impactos socioeconómicos en nuestros países. Desde la TINDAD hemos elaborado algunos indicadores que muestran cuál es la situación social en nuestros países y que además hay una relación entre este alto pago de la deuda e indicadores socioeconómicos. Entre algunos de ellos podríamos mencionar, por ejemplo, que el 40% de las mujeres de América Latina que tienen más de 15 años se han prestado más en el año 2021 para cubrir temas de salud. Entonces, la deuda de las familias está creciendo y principalmente en este caso, segregado por sexo, la deuda de las mujeres creció más para cubrir los temas de salud que obviamente han estado en ese momento y en ese año relacionados con el COVID. Por otro lado, en América Latina, en promedio, el 59% de los niños de 10 años hasta los 10 años no tienen la capacidad de leer un texto simple. Y se prevé que ese indicador va a empeorar tras la pandemia, en estos 2 años posteriores a la pandemia, cuando tengamos los indicadores actualizados, porque además es la región que más ha parado en términos de clases para los niños, las clases escolares. Prácticamente todo ese año la América Latina no ha tenido clases escolares. Eh, y la falta de inversión, de mayor inversión, porque nuestros países priorizan el pago de la deuda, tiene una relación y tiene un impacto. Entre otros indicadores, podemos mencionar también que casi el 40% de la población tiene riesgos de inseguridad alimentaria, que es casi un 30% más alto de lo que teníamos hace 5 años. Entonces, realmente estas tendencias son preocupantes para los países de nuestra región. Entre las soluciones que planteamos está que es importante una nueva arquitectura de la deuda para contribuir, por un lado, a alcanzar la Agenda 2030 y más allá, también para implementar la agenda climática y especialmente cuando hablamos de poder contribuir a el financiamiento para la adaptación con financiamiento no reembolsable para el sur global, es decir, financiamiento justo. No podemos nosotros, no es justo que podamos tener proyectos y programas de adaptación al cambio climático con más deuda. También un cambio en la arquitectura de la deuda contribuiría a poder cumplir con nuestros derechos humanos, a reducir las desigualdades, a eliminar el círculo vicioso de la deuda que prácticamente se refleja en todos los países del sur y alcanzar además con un cambio en las reglas de la deuda, poder lograr un sistema económico financiero más justo, donde la deuda no sea un mecanismo geopolítico que siga permitiendo o perpetuando el poder que tienen los acreedores sobre los deudores. ¿A qué nos referimos con arquitectura de deuda? ¿Qué cambios estaríamos planteando para lograr estos objetivos? Y en general hablamos de una reforma de la arquitectura financiera, de la cual la deuda es parte, y una de nuestras principales propuestas es tener un marco, una convención marco de Naciones Unidas para la deuda soberana. Y entre algunas características de lo que esto implicaría está el gestionar o generar un alivio de la deuda inmediato, incluyendo una cancelación de la deuda a los países de ingresos bajos, ingresos medios, que están en este momento en necesidad. Eh, por otro lado, una resolución, un proceso de resolución de la deuda que sea justo, que en este momento no existe, un sistema que provea, que promueva esto y además que no incluya falsas soluciones, como son, por ejemplo, los canjes de deuda. También incorpora un acceso al financiamiento concesional que pueda estar basado en criterios alternativos de vulnerabilidades, por ejemplo, vulnerabilidades económicas, sociales y climáticas, incluyendo fuentes innovadoras como, por ejemplo, los derechos especiales de giro, sus asignaciones o una reasignación o una redistribución más justa. También una reforma de los bancos multilaterales de desarrollo, que en este momento está en proceso para hacerlos más grandes, mejores y además más efectivos, pero se necesitan otras reformas adicionalmente en los bancos multilaterales de desarrollo para que tengan un rol en el financiamiento de la Agenda 2030 principalmente y la agenda climática. No podría, no se podría seguir construyendo en base al business as usual, a hacer las cosas de la misma manera, en base a inclusive la actual gobernanza que tienen los bancos multilaterales de desarrollo. Otro punto importante es también el rol que tienen las agencias de riesgo crediticias y que se necesita una instancia multilateral o independiente que encare y que realice las calificaciones de crédito a nuestros países, que sea independiente y distinta, porque es muy clara, es muy claro el impacto que tienen los criterios que se utilizan a partir de las actuales agencias en el costo de nuestra deuda y obviamente en el impacto posterior que tienen nuestros presupuestos y en nuestras inversiones. Otro punto importante es reducir el costo de la deuda, que como decía y les mostraba, es bastante alto para los países del sur. Y como parte de esta reducción de los costos de la deuda, también incluye la eliminación de los sobrecargos del FMI, por ejemplo. Al mismo tiempo, se necesita disculpen, al mismo tiempo es importante incorporar cláusulas de deuda ante catástrofes naturales u otras catástrofes que no necesariamente estén vinculadas al clima, como sucedió hace algunos años con la pandemia, por ejemplo, y la incorporación de reformas, de reformas internas legales en los países, sobre todo en los países acreedores, pero también en los países deudores. Y finalmente, que es importante que podamos, que las políticas económicas globales puedan apoyarse en otro tipo de criterios, no solamente en el PIB per cápita, que es un indicador muy estrecho que esconde toda una serie de vulnerabilidades a las cuales nuestros países están expuestos y que es el criterio principal, inclusive para políticas de deuda, para políticas de renegociación, de reestructuración, etcétera. Entonces necesitamos otra forma de medir y de valorar cuáles son las necesidades de nuestros países. Y para complementar, porque esto es parte de la arquitectura de la deuda y una reforma de la arquitectura financiera, pero solamente con políticas de deuda no es suficiente. Se necesitan al mismo tiempo, y más aún en este contexto de de crisis múltiple, se necesitan también otras políticas, como por ejemplo el que los países desarrollados no solamente cumplan con sus compromisos de financiamiento, por ejemplo, en este caso de la ayuda oficial al desarrollo, sino que además vaya más allá y sean más ambiciosos. Y también se necesitan sistemas tributarios progresistas que acompañen y que formen parte de reformas que se den al mismo tiempo. De lo contrario, tendríamos, si logramos un incremento en la recaudación tributaria, por ejemplo, no serviría de nada si vamos a terminar desde nuestros países priorizando el pago de la deuda con este incremento. Entonces se necesitan cambios y reformas que se den al mismo tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Patricia. This was, I think, a very good overview, and also to introduce proposals on the international financial architecture. Just to say, tomorrow we will organize a side event on tax justice, but it's also good to point out this interrelations. What you said about the trends, that I found really quite shocking. Some of the numbers, for example, on education, that's really bad. So yeah, so coming to another country where the situation got really bad some weeks ago, in Kenya. So we will hear from Jane Anyango from Polycom, who is also with GCAP Kenya, about the situation. You have probably heard about the protests against the finance law, where hundreds of people were killed. So yeah, which was also related to the debt situation in Kenya. So we will hear from Jane Anyango, who is a peace activist and especially working for women's and girls' rights. Jane founded Polycom Development Project, first community-based organization in Kibera. Kibera is one of the biggest informal settlements or slums in sub-Saharan Africa, and she's doing a wonderful work. I have been there in May. We have when they organize the people's assemblies. It's really amazing how the girls, the young women, but also young men worked together to improve their situation. And Jane was the founder, and yeah, I'm really enjoying to work with Jane. So you said you were in a bit noisy place, Jane. I hope it's okay now
Yeah,
that we can
I think
hear
I'm
you.
better.
Yeah, can you put on your camera? Is that possible? So
No,
uh,
my camera is not really. I'm not able to
ah,
put on my
okay,
camera.
okay, no problem. We can hear you well. So I don't know exactly in the program it was first written on the African situation, but I think we are all very keen to hear about the situation in Kenya. So I leave it up to you what you cover. So just one request. Patricia talked a bit longer because that was also like the general overview. If you can try to keep it to 7 minutes, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ingo, and everyone who are here today. As Ingo has mentioned, my name is Jane Anyango, coordinating GCAP Kenya, also from Polycom Development Project, which is currently Polycom Girls. So I want to start by just saying that I'm in solidarity with our young people who have come up to make things straight in the country. They have come out so united and determined to see change just to make things right. In fact, they have opened the eyes of so many Kenyans that change is possible. It's so unfortunate that we have had so many of them killed, which is not coming out clearly. We have had so many of them who are still arrested, actually in custody. We have so many of them who are in hospitals, and we are really worried that who is really going to meet these bills, who is going to be there for them, for these young people who are fighting to make things right in our country. So some of the things that our people are complaining, these young people are bringing up, are the things that we have seen, but the Kenyans were becoming so much helpless. We have had the president creating new positions which are not even constitutional. We have had the president just making his own decisions when it comes to borrowing. We have a lot of international travels which many people do not agree with. We have MPs going into meetings carrying money in sacks. There's a lot of corruption in the country. We've had a serious collapse in the health sector where we have had a lot of uh, can I say a lot of we have had cases where the doctors have been on strike and people are not able to they are not able to attend to the common people because now the rich people are able to go to their private hospitals. We have had the new levies, imposed on the people, like the housing levy, that was just, it was refused, like the courts declined to assent to it, but it still went on. We have the education sector, like right now we are having the new education system, which is, I think is it 3 years old, but it's not yet taking shape. Our teachers are yet to be trained on the new education system that is coming up. Our retirees are not getting their retirement benefits. People retire to go home, then there's no pensions. We have the cash transfers on social protection, which are not frequent. They come in when they like, and we have the free maternal services that have actually, the situation has worsened because whatever we had, which we called the policy we had, which was called Linda Mama, which was free access to maternal services, has been scrapped off. So there's just a lot of so many things that are going on, unnecessary international travels by the government, by even the president. The president is never in the country. So this time the young people just said, you're not even going to the high level political forum as much as we are reporting. Kenya is reporting this time around. The president has not been able to travel. So it's really unfortunate that we are talking about a president who talked about reducing the Kenyan budget, but has actually borrowed more than 1.2 trillion in the past 9 months in office. So we are really worried. The country is worried. People are worried. Everything is so uncertain. Even today is Tuesday, they had a demonstration. We have bad people I think, with money who have joined in. The young people who are very organized, not destroying anything. Joining in and really causing a lot of distractions. If you look at our young people, when they managed to get into parliament, they were just taking their selfies and having a lot of celebrations. But now the destruction that was in our parliament, it's just so hard to comprehend. Like right now, the young people, some of them who are caught, they are charging them with robbery with violence, which is really tough. We have had like so many bodies were retrieved from a quarry yesterday. So people are suspecting a lot of things, which I cannot just talk about here. But what we are saying as a country is that things are not working well. If we are looking at the sustainable development goals, I'm just wondering where we are going to be if where we are right now. We're just worried about the debts that are there, and they continue to come. They're accumulating debts.
I heard it was good. I heard that you gotta read the waste time.
Sorry for that.
Sorry
This is
about,
yeah, I think
the hacking.
yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
solved now.
I'm just
Yeah.
finishing. Yes, I'm just finishing. So we had the pandemic. Right now we have the climate change crisis. Just recently we had very serious flooding, which was forced by serious evictions. People are crying. People are not happy. And if we are talking about care economy, then we are looking at many countries in Africa where aging is becoming a crisis. We have no plans. We have no social security for the aged and even other special groups in our communities. So we are really worried. We don't know what is going to happen next. We just, we have investors going away. People are losing their jobs. And so I'm just talking about Kenya, but I know in most African communities or African countries, we have similar problems where we have a lot of on paper, but in reality, we are not practical. So as we are here halfway mark the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are talking about collapsed sectors. We are talking about, uncollaborative processes where the leaders just make decisions without involving the people. We are talking about people who are still left, so much left behind. So we are just, I don't know where we are right now, but we are hopeful still that the developed countries will actually listen to us and write off the debt so that we are able to reorganize ourselves. If we are putting our heads together, if we are consolidating our dream of the Vision 2030. Otherwise, I'm happy to have a conversation where we are right now, and I hope things will be okay in my country and in other countries across Africa. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Jane. I think it's important to hear voices from Kenya and the different countries. So it's also shocking to hear the news about people killed and bodies found. It seems not all is it's clear so far. So it will be important to get more information from you also in the coming weeks and months. But I think the Kenya case also showed very clearly the interconnection of debt and tax. So as the government tried to raise the tax for basic goods to pay for the debt services, and this was basically also demanded by the International Monetary Fund. So this is also this connection of national corrupt government with the IMF. I think that's also very not a new case, but still again shocking. So let's hear from Asia now. So we have May Buenaventura from the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, APMDD, another region network which is also doing very good work on the debt situation, but also in general on people-centered development, economic and environmental rights, and justice. And May is managing the work on debt justice and also the green economic rebuilding. So one topic is also the struggle for cancellation of illegitimate debts of the Global South. I think that's also one important element. Yes, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the Global Week of Action during the annual meetings of IMF and World Bank in October were initiated and are coordinated by APMDD since 2020. Yeah, please, May.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, I think so.
Wait, hold on.
Are you co-host?
Yes,
yes.
they made me okay. Share screen.
Good.
I'm a bit clumsy about these things. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, it's not yet
Okay.
in presentation mode, but
there
yes,
it is.
now it is. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is a very short presentation because my colleagues have already laid out a lot of similar things that are happening in our region. So just perhaps just a little bit about where we are. So you may know that a large part of the world's population, up to 60%, are in this region of Asia and Pacific. And we're, according to the Commission on Economic, Social, Cultural Commission, SCAP, 55% of the world's poor are also residing here. And that as of their last estimates, around or even more than 200 million people are living on less than around $2 a day. So it's a pretty dire situation already, even long before COVID, and with all the disasters, a lot of disasters happening in this region, so that all exacerbates. And you add to that a mounting debt problem, deep dependence on borrowings, and also increasing, swiftly accelerating accumulation of public debt. So this all the reports are, they agree that progress is alarmingly slow, and that this was pretty much a shock to me, that without transformational actions, SDGs will not be achieved by 2060, will not be achieved by 2062. And at the current rate, it will achieve only 1/3 of the necessary progress by 2030. So if you look at the countries in the Asia Pacific region, the report says that not a single goal is on track to be achieved by 2030, which is only a few years away. So this is the report, and you can read more about it here in this report. No, that's online also. Okay, so with the polycrisis, the climate change, and the debt burdens and war, the estimates of SDG financing is already registering between 2.5 trillion and 4 trillion annually. Patricia also mentioned this. What's the estimated need? But if you look at, what it's like, you're trying to raise money, but also losing a lot of money at the same time, and people are paying for it because of the annual debt servicing cost, especially in the least developed countries, estimated at 40 billion between 2023 and 2025. So this already represents an increase of more than 50% from the 26 billion in 2022. So not only the LDCs, but also in many countries in the Asian region that spend a significant amount of the taxes on interest payments. And for LDCs, this is estimated at quadruple or 4 times that was being spent more than a decade ago. And if we look also at globally, the 40% of the global population live in countries where government spending on interest payments is way higher than the public expenditures for education and health. So just a few examples of what are off track. I think we, of course, goal 1, no poverty. That's really pretty much plain to see how off track that goal is. And if we look at goal 2 of zero hunger, this was already prevalent before COVID-19, but the pandemic, of course, made it even worse. So it is estimated that in 2021, there were 425 million people undernourished in the region, which is more than half of the global figure. And again, South Asia figures prominently as having the highest sub-regional population in the world facing hunger, with more than 330 million people. So I think among the participants, we have a lot of participants from South Asia, and perhaps they have a more accurate picture of how dire the situation is. And of course, this goal also includes food security and insecurity, or sheer gross lack of food sovereignty. So it increased from 2019 to 2021, and I think this is still rising, with the highest in the subregions of the South and Southwest Asia. So Southwest Asia, I think, covers several Middle East countries. Another one off track is the goal 8 of decent work and economic growth. So this has also is and continues to be upward trend of unemployment. And the report also tells us that overall employment to population ratio are still below even before the COVID time. Employment to population ratios also are lower than before the pandemic in East Asia, where I am, the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and of course South Asia. And ILO issued this observation that no progress has been made on its indicators of Goal 8 over the last 8 years, and the international community today is almost as far from reaching the targets of SDG 8 as it was in 2015. So this is really, a very sad fact that as we approach the deadline of 2030, so many people are suffering and are, even the basic rights to food and health is not being complied with. So connecting this to debt, of course, no, because many of our countries are so dependent on borrowings that it becomes almost part of government policy that when things go wrong, let's look for loans to borrow. And of course, this dependence grows deeper and deeper, and it continues such that governments prioritize debt payments because they depend on it already so badly. So according to this data, that it says that at least 3.3 billion people live in economies that spend more on interest payments than on health and education. Also observing that external debt stocks of developing economies more than doubled in a decade. And if you look at the developing economies, it reached 11.4 trillion in 2023, or more than double the value recorded a decade ago. So we can really see the connections of how governments are, surrendering from their public mandates of providing for essential services in order to meet their debt service payments, and of course, to be able to continue borrowing. And so if you look at debt servicing costs, these are also rising. So on long-term external public and publicly guaranteed debt, especially for the poorest of the developing economies, this has been on the upward trajectory. And not only among the low-income countries, but also a rising trend among middle-income countries, which are actually seen as, that's why they are not eligible in the so-called debt relief measures of the G7, because we are seen as being better off, but there is no really close look at the inequalities within that also affect middle-income countries in terms of their debt burdens, and similar also to the situations in some of the lower-income countries. So on average, debt service eats up a large chunk of what could have gone to public expenditures. So this report says that across 139 World Bank borrowing countries, this is up to 35% of the revenues are eaten up by servicing the debt, which means payments for both principal and interest. And this is a share that rises significantly among the lower income and lower middle income countries. And in the face of all this, of the debt crisis, we were then offered various schemes, notably the debt relief schemes from the G7 that eventually turned out failures, no? And we are worse off now than a couple of years ago. So as what happened, they simply suspended the payments, but no significant amounts were canceled. And so now they are falling due in 2025, which means they did kick the can down the road and just postpone the pain of now countries having to sacrifice a lot of their social service budgets to be able to service the debt. And we also have this problem of private and commercial lenders who now hold over 60% of sovereign debt and continue to escape responsibility or escape the debt reduction efforts. They do not participate. They are not required to participate. And even with the denials of the IMF, loan conditionalities are still being imposed. So we have as a clear example, Pakistan, which suffered some of the worst flooding in many decades, and they still had to pay their debt service. They had to also pay the surcharges of the IMF, and even now they are being compelled to comply with austerity measures because they are borrowing from the IMF. So this includes the removal of food and fuel subsidies without any safety nets, and cutting social spending and privatizing public assets, including public services. So as Patricia earlier mentioned, I just want to assert once more the need for a global commitment for the profound transformation of the financial architecture, and one that prioritizes the needs of developing countries, including urgent needs and demand for the cancellation of unsustainable and illegitimate debts. So the framework convention that Patricia earlier mentioned, that we want to fight for, to have this framework convention, we hope that also includes a deep look at how much of the loan is unpayable, and how much of that loans that are being claimed from the global south contributed to the destruction of the environment, made us more vulnerable to the climate crisis, violated human rights, displaced communities. These loans are illegitimate and must be immediately canceled. So the logo here is just a early advertisement for everyone to join us in the Global Week of Action come October 2024. So looking forward to any questions or clarifications. Thank you, Ingo.
Thank you, May. I think that was a really very good overview on the situation in Asia, and also showing that the situation in Asia is quite affected. I mean, often it maybe even in civil society we tend to talk about the situation in Africa only, but people, for example, in South Asia and also other countries, even in middle income countries, are quite affected. So yeah, so thank you very much. And yeah, I think we will continue to work together on the changes, transformation, or however we call it, of the international financial architecture. Yeah, there is I mean, you mentioned Pakistan, so we also have people from Pakistan here on the call. That would be also interesting. Now we first go to Sri Lanka, a country which was extremely affected by the debt crisis. So therefore, it's great that we have the colleague here from Sri Lanka, Emisa Tegal. She's from the Yukti Debt Justice Collective. And Emisa is a lawyer and also researcher. She has worked for public law and fundamental rights, labor law, family law, a lot on gender based violence, domestic violence in the last 17 years. And she is a member of the Feminist Collective for Economic Justice. So yeah, Emisa, how is the situation in Sri Lanka? And maybe you can give us a yeah, the overview also of the picture coming from 2022 until today.
Thank
Please.
you. Nice to join you. Also wanted to start off by saying, just to extend that solidarity with those in Kenya who are fighting really strongly, and we are watching the situation there and also being inspired by the kind of people's activism that is taking place, and saddened by the response that it's getting from the government. Let me also just share some slides to make it easier to see. Okay, so that I can work on my time as well. Okay, here we are.
Yes, we can see.
Right.
Good, good.
So I mean, being part of the Feminist Collective on Economic Justice was just a response, a knee-jerk response to the 2022 situation in Sri Lanka, when the country, for the first time, could not meet its foreign debts, and people moved into the streets in the numbers, asking for massive changes. And we really wanted to highlight the stories of individuals and what was happening to the lives and livelihoods of people as a result of the crisis. And I think everyone mentioned, and this slide only goes to show that our countries have a history of people struggling with various issues when we come to this point of having also a debt crisis. So Sri Lanka is a country that's recovering from 30 years of a war, internal conflict. There has been continued governments that have neglected the once visionary commitment that Sri Lanka has had to public education, which is free education and free health in Sri Lanka, right? And from the 30s and 40s, which has really made one of the reasons why Sri Lanka actually has good human development indices. But over the decades, we have seen that lack of commitment to these very important important public commitments, which have a huge impact on the lives of people. We've seen little commitment to agriculture and food security. We've seen no real response to land issues by way of land policy, no strong environment, climate change policies, massive corruption by ruling elites, no response to vulnerable communities because the development has really not focused on the masses. So we have war-affected plantation populations, rural low-income, urban low-income populations that are really struggling. Human and economic impact of also the bombings in 2019, the COVID pandemic and how that affected the economy. All this is in the background and what people are really reeling and trying to come out of when the economic crisis hits, which is Sri Lanka defaulting on its external debt for the first time in its post-colonial history in April 2022. When that happens in April, we see that there's a tremendous uprising of people in peaceful protests across the country. But they were not only demanding the fuel, electricity, food, and medicine, which there were shortages of at the time. They were also demanding a system change. There was a demand for the stepping down of those in parliament, the representatives who had failed the people. There was a no to corruption, a no to broad executive power. So there was a real democratic voice that was found within the call of people. That resulted in the prime minister resigning, the president resigning, a new president being installed by parliament and not really elected by the people. We are waiting this year for an election by the people of a new president, and hopefully by the end of the year, and then also of a new parliament. We also saw protesters being violently removed soon after the new president was installed, and then the government moving into debt restructuring, which is very much driven by the IMF program and negotiations with creditors, which the population in Sri Lanka, the people of Sri Lanka, have little information about, and that has been a huge issue where we are unable to understand what is happening and what the impact of that is going to be. So much of it is in the dark. One of the things that we've seen since 2022 is this huge outpouring of new laws that have been coming in by what is clearly a government and parliament that has lost the confidence of the people. So there is really a legitimacy and democracy deficit which is governing Sri Lanka at the moment. We see no consultations, no transparency, no accountability on the laws that are coming in. Those two charts that you see on both sides is just a glimpse of the laws that are coming in, and it has legislation that is seriously impacting the economic lives of people and also infringing fundamental rights, human rights of individuals and making that space so much more smaller. All of this is being done as being said that it is a response to the debt crisis. So the debt crisis has really given those in power some leverage, some opportunity to pass a lot of economic and human rights laws that are sort of curbing human rights in the last 2 years. And this is something that we are also pushing back against in these conversations. The last little bit at the bottom here, you'll just see that there is a real burdening of the poorest of people with indirect taxation, austerity measures, removal of subsidies on electricity and fuel. Beneficiaries to the social protection system has been changed, and there is chaos happening there. Reducing savings on pension funds, even though it was external debt that needed to be restructured, domestic debt was restructured by using of pension fund savings. Microfinance laws that were attempting to introduce, but were affecting particularly women microfinance credit groups. New labor reforms were suggested. Plantation workers in the tea and rubber sectors were being adversely affected during this time by contractualization and informalization practices really creeping in. And things like economic transformation bill, which suddenly is opening up, it hasn't really passed yet, but is opening up the country to foreign investment with no real sense or controls about how those decisions are going to be taken. So really feeling it as people of Sri Lanka as to where that sovereignty lies and where that decision making is taking us. You'll notice in 2022, poverty really tripled in Sri Lanka during the crisis. We had headline inflation of 64%, food inflation going up to almost 90%, right? Food insecurity was at 30% at the time. 86% of people said that they reduced quantity and quality of food. 17% children under 5 were reported as malnutritioned. And these are things that have long-lasting impacts. These are not just for 2022. They have life-changing impacts on the lives of individuals. And what really was the response of the government of the day, which we say is that government that had clearly lost the confidence of the people. So we see some of the measures I've put up here, the strong austerity measures that come in with the doubling of interest rates, devaluing of the rupee, increasing indirect taxes, removing subsidies on utilities, and cutting public spending. We see low commitment to public education, while there is a growing conversation about privatizing of education. We see new social protection schemes saying that they're responding to the crisis, but the numbers of beneficiaries being cut down and temporal limits being introduced and targeting being very strongly taken as the approach. And we really are also looking at why we don't have data on maternal mortality, child marriages in Sri Lanka, which are really important things to be looking at and responding to as government at this time. And on the side, you'll also see other things that have been really impacting individuals' lives as a result of no action being taken. So infant mortality has gone up, increased school dropouts in the estate sector, malnutrition of 5-year-olds, half, they say, the population, cost of living going up, real values of incomes have really come down, and almost 1 million people disconnected from the grid. We have a 22 million population, right? Just unable to afford electricity. So just put this slide up to just demonstrate what cartoon is also showing very simplistically as to what's happening, their impressions of what's happening in Sri Lanka. There is all these shortages, the difficulties to secure food, schooling, medicines, and you're also being told at the same time not to protest. So that violation of human rights is really going hand in hand with the impact of the debt crisis on the lives of Sri Lankans. I'm going to keep this really brief, only to say that we are really pushing for that strong conversation on a new, just debt architecture more internationally, so that Sri Lanka too can draw from that conversation. And in view of the sovereignty of countries like Sri Lanka and our right to democratic self-determination, debtor country people should really be able to access alternate debt sustainability analysis, not only from the IMF, right, as a basis for debt restructuring. So you're looking at measures that are about comparable treatment and cooperation of creditors, increasing legal and financial protections for countries like ours in debt restructuring, instead of just this pressure on borrowing countries, basing debt sustainability on the impact of the debt on public services and basic needs instead of the pure ability to repay debt, and moving from the short-term and limited liquidity measures. Sri Lanka can also be a test case for a reformed, more just debt, and not just Sri Lanka, but countries in this situation. So really also looking at why can't we take this opportunity to really make that difference and start making those changes in the countries, and asking for them when we are in this situation and we are really worried about where it is moving towards as well. This is just a picture from one of the protests in 2022, really saying what we want to say, in that the system really needs to change, not just in Sri Lanka, but also internationally, on the issue of international debt or financial architecture, and otherwise it will just end up killing us. So I hope that gave a quick overview. Happy to answer questions if there are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ermisa. I think it was very interesting to hear also what happened then after 2022, because I have to admit that sometimes you follow then the situation in a country when there's a crisis, but then afterwards we don't get much information. So just to mention that I worked in Bangladesh for a long time, and we always looked to Sri Lanka as one of the good cases, and like for education and health. So yeah, it's somehow very sad that there's so yeah that this is happening. The more important to work together internationally. So we are now trying to make a bit of a to jump to the social protection side. So we have heard a lot on social protection just now in Sri Lanka, but also before. So we have Samuel Obara from the African Platform for Social Protection with us. Samuel works since 20 years in different positions, including in help age, but he also worked with governments in Eastern and Southern Africa. Yeah, he's now working with the Africa Platform, so which is also a good partner of GCAP. When we were just together in Nairobi in a meeting of with members of GCAP Africa, where Samuel talked about the African Protocol for social protection, which was really interesting. So it will be good to hear from your side how the debt crisis is affecting the social protection, and also I understand that you will talk about one of the funding instruments, the Global Accelerator for Decent Work and Social Protection, initiated by the Secretary General of the United Nations. How could that play a role, or is it not really contributing? So it will be good to hear your perspective. Samuel, yeah, please.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, very well. Yeah.
I think thank you so much, colleagues, and let me build on the ongoing discussion, and appreciate also what my colleague Jane contributed, because I'm also from Kenya. I also have colleagues from APSP who are also on the call. So I will take you through around the new UN mechanism, the Global Accelerator, and my reflection around the funding on social protection. Basically, this is the background. These are new mechanism. They launched in 2021 by the UN General Assembly I think drawing lessons from COVID-19. But it is a very good systematic mechanism for financing social protection in specific context. I have just made a follow-up call in some countries, and I think the UN rapporteur is doing efforts following up by calling governments to update on the status of social protection funding and commitment, which is good. I think the assumption here is that the SDGs 169 targets are anchored on the assumption that there will be steady economic growth. Presentation so far indicates a discouraging trend based on a number of factors, especially in low and middle income countries. Because we had an increase of what the World Bank called the new poor, people who are not poor, but they were getting into the poverty category. So we are seeing a global trend increase in poverty. And if you link to the issue of debt, then the issue gets complicated. Now I want to go into the nexus between debt and social protection. And I want to say that due to debt distress, there's what we are seeing reduced government spending on key services like infrastructure, health, education, and environmental protection, which are key for achieving the SDGs. And I have singled out few ones and said that many SDGs, particularly those related to environmental sustainability, like SDG 6, which talks about clean water and sanitation, which is very key. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. SDG 13, clean climate action, which I think my colleagues have also spoken to. Not forgetting the issue of education and health, it requires significant investment. And therefore, a debt crisis limits the country's ability in appropriate renewable energy, climate resilience measures, and conservation efforts. Now, what does this architecture calls us to? I think it calls about having a fund or a connected mechanism for social protection. But I have said that we need to look at this in the wider ecosystem where we are in. And one is this fund is calling for increased domestic resourcing. I think in a number of countries, in low-income countries, most of the funding is from the international community. I think it's worse in most countries in Africa, whereby the commitment coming for funding for social protection from the national budget, other than a few countries, North Africa and South Africa, is less than 5% of the national budget, which is a shame. So I have said we also need to look at the issue of innovative financing mechanism. And I've given an example of how can we incentivize social impact bonds as one of just the measure to attract private into social protection and increase the funding base. I'm arguing that we need to design public-private partnership value chain system so that we can have an attractive space to synergy corporations coming in to support social protection. We need efficient systems, policies, and fiscal discipline. A fund is not sufficient beside the efficiency, the policies, and the fiscal discipline. I will give an example of what are we learning from the Global Fund for HIV, TB, and malaria. I think this is one of the most successful funds that is designed globally with the global commitments, but also with national commitments. with the global design and national design, with the global monitoring and national monitoring. And we can celebrate the impact it has done by reducing the incidence on HIV, TB, and now malaria, which has been one of the greatest public health threats. And therefore, a similar fund designed along that will complement, because poverty and disease coexist. Then I've also looked at the issue of leadership and governance, and I've just also gave the example of the Gen Z generation in Kenya, whereby they're talking about accountable leadership and governance. So there's been a lot of wastage and corruption, especially in Africa. Even within the Global Fund, that has been an example. The issue of scandals and corruption has been annoying and discouraging. So I think the most important thing that I'm talking is about the issue of managing wastage, improving governance, transparency, and accountability. Way forward, I think one is we need to look at, and I think my colleagues have talked to the issue of multinational lending prescriptions. I think it's the bleeding citizens. Not just to death, but before you die, you are being stripped of your dignity and humanity. So we need a new lending model that can really liberate low and income countries. Then the two, of course, I've already spoken to the issue of we need to accelerate the formation and the functionality of a global fund on social protection. 3 is we need to learn from the health sector. I think in Africa, there was a commitment, a political commitment from the African Union that 15% of the national budget should be allocated to health. Of course, not many countries has honored that, almost 20 years, but it just shows a commitment. Other than just commitment to finance, there should be an agreed percentage, either of our GDP or of a national budget. I'm arguing on, which has already been talking about, the issue of debt restructuring, so that payment of debt should not create a crisis like that we are seeing in a number of countries in Asia and Africa. We need to leverage on technology to improve on efficiency and accountability. And I think we are learning a lot on how technology can improve efficiency and accountability. But also it can be a double-edged sword, because it can also compromise on data privacy and then health taxation. And lastly, but not least, this fund must look at the issue of investment where the need is greatest. We need to have innovative mechanisms where we work with the youth, the women, and the grassroots leadership in ensuring this fund works well and is managed well. Asante sana, thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for this important points. And as I said, this is from a different perspective. So, but we could see clearly how they belong together. So also, thank you for keeping your time. I know we are generally a bit late, so some people wrote in the chat. That's also good, because we don't really have much time for discussion afterwards. But so if you have points, please write in the chat, and then also answer whatever comes in the chat, please. So we have now our last speaker, Raman Adhikari. He's regional coordinator of SAPE, which is the South Asian Association for Poverty Alleviation. which is a old network, I would say, at least from my understanding. I from Bangladesh, I know it since long time. So Praman, he works with SAPIT, but also with LDC Watch. Many of you might know. He coordinates advocacy and also campaign actions with civil society at national and regional levels. Especially on food sovereignty, women's rights, labor rights, and economic justice. So we will hear the original topic, actually, when we had still Arjun Kaki, was bridging gaps in ODA, official development assistance to finance SDGs in least developed countries. So I'm not fully sure whether this is exactly your topic as well, Praman, but maybe you can tell us. Please go ahead, Praman.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Ingo. I will try to cover that topic, which was supposed to be covered by Arjun. Yeah, he
Okay,
was unable to join. So,
good.
yeah, dear friends and esteemed colleagues, greetings and warm regards from Nepal.
Sorry, can you put on your camera, or if
Yeah,
not
I will
possible,
try.
yeah, still good to see if possible. If not, it's not a problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Is it?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
So I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizer GCAP and to all our esteemed co-organizer. As we meet today, we stand at a critical juncture for vulnerable nations and for marginalized groups worldwide, especially the geographically remote and economically smaller nations. The SDGs represent our collective ambitions and efforts to create a better and more equitable world by 2030. However, at the decade's halfway mark, achieving these goals remains an improbable task. So to transform this problematic scenario, considerable measures must be undertaken urgently. A significant impediment to progress is the severe lack of funds for the SDGs implementation, coupled with many developing and least developed countries, LDCs, having insufficient public revenue. These problems are exacerbated by the debt crisis, which greatly weakens the already precarious financial standing, especially of LDCs. The debt crisis is facilitated by unjust and exploitative mechanisms that force LDCs to pay substantial sums to lending countries and private lenders. As Patricia also shared, such a huge drain of finances naturally leads to severe limitations, and thus LDCs are unable to invest in critical areas such as health, education, and the social protection of the people. So in some African nations, the debt has doubled since 2010, up from 74.5% back then to 140% in 2020. So this leads to extremely imbalanced budgeting as nations are forced to prioritize debt repayment over meeting the needs of the people. For example, in 2017, Sudan owed $40 billion in debt, and that was equivalent to over 70% of its GDP. So it left little investment capacity for essential services. So this is sadly a common scenario in most of the LDCs. According to a 2023 UN report, 3.3 billion people live in nations that spend more on interest payment over health and education, which is also discussed in detail by our friend May in her presentation. So the official development assistance ODA is supposed to facilitate the drive towards the holistic fulfillment of SDGs. But on the contrary, the ODA has become another instrument for exploitative practices that drain resources from vulnerable countries. It is coming also in the form of loans, and these loans compromise the sustainability of the national economies that are already vulnerable to various shocks. The ODA is a grant mechanism which should be able to equip and empower LDCs rather than hinder their development. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda Agreement in 2015 promised to recommit the developed countries to provide 0.7% of their GNI to as ODA and 0.15% to 0.2% of their GNI to LDCs. However, the target has not yet been realized, and there is a less prospect of meeting it anytime sooner. So in this regard, LDC Watch would like to call on development partners to fulfill at the earliest their aid commitment, which was also reiterated at the Doha Program of Action for the least developed countries for the decade 2022 to 2031, which is also known as DPOA. LDC Watch also encourages development partners to allocate at least 50% of net ODA to LDCs as foreseen in paragraph 52 of Addis Ababa Action Agenda. In addition, despite the commitments at global platforms to improve country ownership, the aid-receiving LDCs are often the least involved and the least influential stakeholder group in multilateral policy discussion or reform efforts. Another critical issue is the impact of climate change in LDCs, and some of the examples are glacial lake outburst floods and flash floods. So despite contributing minimally to global warming, least developed countries and small island developing nations seats bear the brunt of climate-related disasters. Therefore, seeking reparations from industrialized countries which historically contributed to climate change becomes imperative. The newly established Loss and Damage Fund, now renamed as Fund for Responding Loss and Damage, must receive substantial funding, and it is a responsibility of industrialized countries to support this cause. Although the international community has placed much climate finance to support adaptation and mitigation against climate-related disasters in developing countries, how this finance will be raised remains unclear. So any finances that goes towards climate change should be in addition to, that is over and above the 0.7% of GNI commitment, because it wasn't discussed or recognized in 1970. So using the ODA positively would greatly benefit the LDCs in their journey towards achieving SDGs. The ODA reached a budget of $287 billion in 2022. And despite these numbers, it falls short of the SDG 17 target. The key trends in 2022 were increased ODA to developed countries and refugees, and a shift from grants to loans. So we must reverse these trends for long-term global stability and equity among nations, as in their current form, they leave many nations vulnerable and economically restricted. So furthermore, ODA dropped by $4 billion in 2022 for developing countries, and this drop affects over 70 countries, which is nearly 3 billion people. And aid to LDCs fell by 4%, and such drops are likely to occur again every year if we do not start working towards change in demanding accountability and clear financial support. So regular aid allocations have declined, and overall contributions are far away from meeting SDG targets of 0.7% of GNI. So the role of ODA is important for LDC's economic development, also filling its critical financial gaps, and also to promote its productive capacity. Also, it is important for the sustainable and irreversible graduation. So if we take example from Africa, the Botswana and Cape Verde, they successfully graduated from LDC status largely due to substantial ODA inflows. So harnessing the ODA and using it as a vehicle for economic growth, and therefore becoming less dependent on loans is the optimal long-term strategy that LDC should follow. So in 2023-6, LDCs were in debt distress, and A further 17 were at high risk of debt distress. The total external debt for LDCs was a staggering $570 billion in 2022, more than 3 times higher than in 2006. So we believe overturning this problematic scenario requires us to look both inwards and outwards. So on the part of LDCs, on behalf of LDC, civil society would like to recommend integrating and aligning ODA with the national priorities and build synergies among all forms of financing for development to enhance quality of support for development effectiveness. And also urge governments for LDCs to come up with a clear aid policy to ensure that aid is used transparently and effectively. Similarly, we must fix our taxation system, as also shared by Patricia in her presentation. We demand for the progressive taxation system, and also we should focus on curbing illicit financial flows and tax abuses. Meanwhile, the national attempts towards country-owned aid management must also be complemented by efforts at the global level to reduce aid fragmentation. So a strong cooperation and coordination among the development partners, governments, and civil society organizations can increase the volume and effectiveness of aid, which is essential for LDCs for their sustainable and irreversible graduation and meeting the sustainable development goals. At last, meeting SDG targets is not only a concern for underdeveloped countries, as their fulfillment will represent global progress that will benefit all nations. So to achieve this parity, we must keep advocating, working, building, educating, and fighting injustices and inequality, as only then we can set on the path towards a better and a more equitable world. So thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Praman. I think it's really important to have this perspective from the least developed countries. And I can tell you, as I come from Germany, that basically what is happening in Europe at the moment is mostly not in favor of official development assistance. So just for the German budget for 2025, there were again big cuts of almost $1 billion. So yeah, and then of course the trends of having loans instead of grants, also in the climate financing. So there are many important points we need to think together. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, we hope we can see how we can actually campaign together for global justice, for economic justice, especially around the different dates in the coming year. Somebody wrote in the mentioned the FFD4, the Financing for Development 4 conference in Spain next year. Also, then there will be the World Social Summit in November 25. Of course, there are different other processes, elements, like the G20 meeting in Brazil. Yeah, different UN processes and the climate corps and so on. So what I really hope is that we can stay in touch, we can work together with on the different topics and see how we can find a common message. Yeah, so I would like to actually come to an end. We are already 8 minutes over time. It would have been good to have more time to discuss. It's somehow it happens like often that we have too many inputs, but I think each of the inputs were really valuable and important, and we got a very good picture. So I would like to thank first of all each of the presenters for your time, your thoughts, also yeah. that is really very important. Thank you for that. Also, I'd like to thank again the interpreters. That's very essential for a good work cooperation at global level. I also like to express special thanks to Pradeep Baisak, my colleague and Asia coordinator who prepared this event. I think a lot of communication, that's really great. Also, Pragati Prava from our team working for the communications, worked with Pradeep. Thanks also to you, Pragati. So, and thanks to everybody who participated. And I hope we can stay in contact in different forms over the coming months. Yeah, so I'm going to enter the HLPF soon. We have a meeting on the World Social Summit starting in 20 minutes. Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. Have a good day, good evening, and see you soon.
Okay, thank you, Ingo, for nice motivation. Thanks, colleagues. Bye-bye. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.